again. And before I start, again, as I've said for the past 6 weeks, hope everybody's well, hope their loved ones are well, and hope their family is well, and I hope it remains that way long. Personal message for Beryl and Terry out in France. No, you're not going to see the dog today because he's sunbathing in the back garden and I'm not going to disturb him. Despite the pestering from the engagement team, and especially Amy, I've got something a little bit different today, which some of you will know something about. Hopefully, most of you won't know much about it. But to make sure that I get it 100% correct, this time I've scripted it. The previous 5 weeks, it will come as no surprise that I was doing it all from memory and therefore cuffing it as I went along, so probably that showed. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is two onlys, basically. There were only 2 Victoria Crosses awarded in the Second World War to RAF aircrew, of which only one was Fighter Command, which most people will know about, and one was awarded in North Africa, which many of you will not know that much about, but those of you like myself, first tour in RAF Gütersloh in 1980, there was a place called the Mali, and I will leave it at that, so you can get your brain thinking, Mali, what's it got to do with Gütersloh and what's it got to do with Victoria Cross? So the first one would be Fighter Command, really. It's an interesting story, but again, nobody really knows the truth. I'll start the day before. The actual Victoria Cross came as a result of an action which occurred over Southampton on the 16th of August 1940, but let's put a bit of context. Battle of Britain, what was going on the day before? The day before was known as the Germans as Black Thursday. It was the day which I think, well, you've heard me mention before, where they attacked as far north as Montrose and as far south as Portland, right the way through to try and split the RAF defences. Another attempt to wipe out the Royal Air Force, and it was the first and last time that they attacked en masse in daylight in the north of England. One of the squadrons which should have been involved that day was 249 Squadron. It was commanded by Squadron Leader John Grandy, who was later to be Marshal of the Royal Air Force and Chief of the Air Staff. And the squadron was formed at Church Fenton, or no longer. Again, I did part of my flying training at Church Fenton, only on the 16th of May 1940. It was therefore working to be operational, and it moved down to RAF Boscombe Down on the 14th of August. Its first major action was the 15th of August, when they intercepted German bombers and their escorts over the Romsey and Southampton area, claiming 5 Messerschmitt 110s destroyed and a Junkers 88 damaged, getting back without a loss. The German losses for the attacks on Andover, Worthy Down and Portland Harbour were 6 Stuka dive bombers, 6 Junkers 88s and 6 Messerschmitt 110s, but at the same time the Germans claimed an incredibly inflated figure of, would you believe, 54 RAF fighters destroyed and a further 6 possibly destroyed. The actual figure was 8 destroyed and 2 damaged, including 2 RAF pilots who got a bit too far across the channel, and one landed his aircraft at Cherbourg and one came down in the sea off Cherbourg, and both were captured. The Germans retired that night, licking their wounds, very much so licking their wounds, because they'd suffered so many losses during the day, but there were little odds and sods going on. But they didn't make a showing the next day until just after midday, when an incredible 104 Stuka dive bombers took to the air with an escort of, wait for it, 257 fighters. And they were going for the airfields of Tangmere, Leon Solent, Gosport, and the radar station at Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. 8 RAF squadrons were scrambled to intercept, with 1 squadron, 43 squadron, 601 squadron and 602 squadrons going after the Stukas off Stelzy Bill, and the remainder, which is including 249 squadron, went after the escorts. Now it was 249 and the Spitfire equipped 152 squadron, which was based at RAF Warmwell, which would you believe now is an open cast mine, and they were told to patrol to the west of Southampton, where they would be joined by Hurricanes of 87 Squadron and 213 Squadron, which were coming up from Exeter. Now, leading red section of 249 Squadron was a 23-year-old Londoner. He had very, very little combat experience, but he was a professional pre-war officer, and his name was Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson. The remainder of his section was a 29-year-old squadron leader, Eric King, who was known in the Air Force as Wizzy, and he was therefore getting combat experience with 249 Squadron before taking command of another squadron, which was 151 Squadron. The third man in the section was a mere 19-year-old, Martin King, no relation to Wizzy King, and he'd only joined 249 Squadron at Leckensfield just about 2 months before. He had very, very little flying experience and very, very little, well, hardly any combat experience. Now, 249 Squadron were very aware there were German fighters around, and they saw in the distance three unidentified aircraft, and Nicholson was told by John Grandy to go and investigate. So he and his section broke away, but were beaten to it by 152 Squadron with their Spitfires. Now, what happened next is best taken from his combat report, which is quite something. And this is what he says. I was leading Red Section in a squadron formation, saw 3 enemy aircraft some distance to the left, informed Blue 1, who was leading formation, who ordered me to investigate. 12 Spitfires, however, engaged this formation before I got into range. I turned to rejoin the squadron, climbing from 15,000 to 17,500 feet, heard tally-ho from Yellow Leader, and immediately afterwards was struck in the cockpit by 4 successive cannon shells, which damaged my hood, set fire to my reserve tank, and damaged my leg and thigh. Not only was his aircraft hit, so were the other 2 aircraft. Martin King's very badly, and Wizzy King's was damaged. None of the 3 RAF pilots saw what attacked them or what caused them to be bounced, but one German pilot claimed to have bounced 2 Hurricanes at 13:36 hours and 30:37 hours, which matches up perfectly with the RAF report, and he shot them down in quick succession. The Germans never used to say the same time for shooting aircraft down. It was always one after the other. No other Hurricanes were lost one after another that afternoon. This was a 26-year-old fighter pilot. He was the equivalent rank of a flight lieutenant, and his name was Heinz Bretnitz. He'd flown in the Spanish Civil War, where he'd shot down 2 aircraft. And at the start of the war, he was commanding a 12 Squadron wing of the Ace of Spades unit. His first victory was the 20th September 1939, and by the end of the Phoney War, so by the 9th of May 1940, he had shot down a total of 5 aircraft. The 2 aircraft he shot down on the 16th of August 1940 were, would you believe it, his 13th and 14th of the war so far. So here we are, is a German pilot who'd flown in Spain, combat missions right from the start of the war, Battle of France. Already, by the time he got there, had shot down 12 aircraft, who bounces a squadron, a section which has 3 pilots who have, 1 who has minimum flying experience and 2 have virtually no combat experience. Let me now take you back to what was going on in James Nicholson's Hurricane. And this is what he continued to say. I immediately pulled my feet up onto the seat and saw at the same time, I dived my nose down, going steep right. It was then I saw a Messerschmitt 110 diving at the save angle and converging. I opened fire at 200 yards and fired until I could bear the heat no more. I then abandoned aircraft with difficulty, and after dropping some 5,000 feet, pulled the cord. Now, everybody assumes that the aircraft that he saw, that he went after, was the aircraft that bounced him. The Germans that day made no claims for Hurricanes, made no claims by Messerschmitt 110s that day. Neither did they lose anybody. And Luftwaffe claims that day were surprisingly accurate, unlike what was reported the day before. They claimed 9 this day, when in fact the RAF lost 7. Just to put that also into context, 27 Stukas were destroyed, according to the RAF. 6 were probably destroyed, 8 damaged, and 3 Messerschmitt 109s destroyed. The actual losses were 9 Stukas destroyed, 8 damaged, and 2 Messerschmitt 109s collided over the Isle of Wight for the loss of 1 pilot. So this time, actually, we got our figures way out of the way. Irrespective of whether he did or didn't shoot down an aircraft, and again, he actually said to his squadron commander afterwards, and I quote, "My reflector sight was on, but I cannot swear whether the firing button was set on to safe or fire." For those who know, the control column on a Spitfire, there'd be a little, you know, the firing button, but around the sun you could turn it on and turn it off. And of course, he had no guarantee that it was actually turned on. If you think about it, if he's being bounced, he wouldn't have had his firing button to on. But you cannot say that he wasn't brave. What he did was incredible, if you think about it, you know, to actually go back into a burning aircraft. But things go from bad to worse now. Nicholson did manage to get away, and as we said, you know, he did go down. And if he'd looked around, despite his wounds, he would have seen Martin King at the same time coming down on his parachute. The two parachutes coming down caused the problem. A Royal Artillery officer, again, Royal Artillery, our army, told his men to take post and open fire, believing they were German parachutists. They were also joined by Holmes Guardsmen, who opened fire and took pot shots at the two RAF pilots coming down. Martin King was either mortally wounded or his parachute collapsed, as it was later seen that he was seen descending normally until 2,000 feet, when his parachute then collapsed and he fell to his death. And he came down at a place called Toot Hill, just south of Romsey. Examination of his parachute did reveal that bullets had passed through the pack, which had damaged the canopy, which, when it opened, didn't hold him up there long enough. He is, out of interest, he's actually buried at Fawley in Hampshire, and he was buried then in the war, and that's where he lies now, not very far from where he was killed. Now, poor old Nicholson was coming down. He had burns to his face and hands. One of his eyelids was severed. He had gunshot wounds of the legs and the thigh, and he was now wounded in the buttocks, courtesy of the Royal Artillery and the Home Guard. And he came down at Millbrook in the area of Southampton. Now, what happened about the third aircraft? Wizzy King, he managed to get back, and for those people who've actually read the book by Wing Commander Tom Neal, who died about a couple of years ago, he wrote about his time in the Battle of Britain. He was with 249 Squadron, and what he actually wrote, he was on the ground when King got back, and he said, here, this is what he actually wrote in his book. He said, "King was excited. He was garrulous, hurrying about, his face creased by sweat and the lines of his oxygen mask. Yes, he'd been hit and damaged. No, he wasn't wounded, but the others had gone. Both gone. Both shot down in flames. The blighters had come down and caught them unawares, down from behind. He was in a highly emotional state and kept talking about tactics. We have to do things differently," he said, talking quickly and gesticulating. 6 days later, King took command of 151 Squadron at Northfield in Essex, and on 24th of August, his air screw was shot off by a German fighter, but he managed to actually glide back to land at Northfield. Sadly, 6 days later, he was the victim of another bounce by German fighters, this time over Mainston, and he was killed instantly at the controls of his aircraft, which then plied straight into the ground at Strood in Kent, taking him with it. He's now buried at Highgate Cemetery in London. Let's go back to poor old James Nicholson. Now he was rushed to the Southampton and Southampton Hospital, where a few days later he was actually able to dictate to his commanding officer what he actually had achieved. 3 weeks later, he was moved to RAF Halton, and then after that, he was moved to Torquay, where he went to convalesce. It was there that he was notified of the following, and again, I quote, this is from the London Gazette. During an engagement near Southampton on 16th of August 1940, Flight Lieutenant Nicholson's aircraft was hit by 4 cannon shells, 2 of which wounded him, whilst another set fire to the gravity tank. When about to abandon his aircraft, owing to flames in the cockpit, he sighted an enemy fighter. This he attacked and shot down, although as a result of staying in his burning plane, he sustained serious burns to his hands, face, neck and legs. Flight Lieutenant Nicholson has always displayed great enthusiasm for air fighting, and this incident shows that he possesses courage and determination of a high order by continuing to engage the enemy after he had been wounded and his aircraft set on fire. He displayed exceptional gallantry and disregard for his own life. Citation is not actually correct. He didn't actually shoot something down, but it's those who ex-Air Force. It's not what you do; it's the way you're written up by the person who put it. And of course, John Grandy did a very good job of that. So, what happened to the chap who shot down Nicholson? Bretnitz was awarded the Knight's Cross, the highest decoration at the time, on the 22nd of October 1940. by which stage he'd been given command of a wing of 3 Messerschmitt 109s. 22nd of June, though, so the day after the Operation Barbarossa, which was the invasion of the Soviet Union, he was badly wounded shooting down his 37th aircraft. He managed to force land, but he died 5 days later in an army hospital from complications after his leg was amputated. And his body now lies in the family plot in Mannheim in Germany. What happened to James Nicholson? Returned to flying in February 1941, first as an instructor, regained his full flying category in September 1941, after which he took command of a night fighter flight. He was then posted to India on a staff tour in early 1942 and given command of 27 Squadron, which were flying Mosquitoes, in August 1943. For his tour and commanding 27 Squadron, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. In August 1944, he went on another staff tour on promotion to Wing Commander, but he wanted to get a bit more operational experience. But 6 days before VE Day, so an interesting, if you think about tomorrow is VE Day, he was on a B-24 Liberator bomber of 355 Squadron, RAF Squadron, and he was flying an observer on a bombing mission. The aircraft caught fire. It was an engine fire. It wasn't as a result of enemy action, and it crashed in the Indian Ocean. Only 2 crews survived from that. One of them wasn't James Nicholson, and he is still reported as missing, even today. So that's the first of the 2. The second of the 2 goes back to what I was saying before. Those of you who served in Germany would have known of the Malcolm Club, the Mali, as it was known. And again, this is about Wing Commander Hugh Malcolm, who was awarded the VC. And again, probably the way you could describe him is very much like James Nicholson, 0 to hero. To set the tone, you've heard the citation for the Victoria Cross for James Nicholson. This is the citation for Hugh Malcolm. The Wing Commander knew that to attack his objective without fighter escort would court almost certain disaster, but in believing the attack to be necessary for the success of the Army's operations, his duty was clear. He decided to attack. So those are the words, part of the citation for his Victoria Cross. Right? He was born in Broughty Ferry in Dundee. He was, as a youngster, he was never happier than when he was working on cars in his engine, always tinkering. But he'd set his mind on joining the Royal Air Force. And in January 1936, he was accepted into the RAF College at Cranwell. He would have been 18 at the time. He received his wings in April 1937 and graduated as a pilot officer in December of the same year, after which he was posted to 26 Army Corporation Squadron at Catterick in January 1938. Now, the squadron at that time was equipped with very old biplanes, Hawker Hector and Hawker Audax, something you can go and have a look at afterwards maybe. And he actually sort of proved himself, and this is a quote from his logbook actually, an above average pilot, but inclined to be overconfident. Now, in February 1939, 26th Squadron was re-equipped with a Western Lysander, of which you can see a flying example of that at the Shuttleworth connection. On the 20th of May that year, he and aircraftsman Dixon were in the back seat, were selected to provide a slow flying demonstration at the Empire Air Display at Ringway near Manchester. However, what was written in his logbook about being overconfident came back to bite him. During a left-hand turn during the display between 250 and 300 feet, the Lysander stalled and crashed. And he actually wrote in his logbook, and I was very fortunate to be loaned it by his daughter, said, "It fell out of me hands." He was very, very badly injured and suffered a very severe head injury. If you see photographs of Hugh Malcolm, you can actually see the scar on his head. And it was only as a result of major surgery that his life was saved. Dixon, nobody knows what happened to him, but he was actually injured in the time. When war was declared in September 1939, Malcolm was posted to 17 training group. He was still receiving hospital treatment at the time. So you can see that, that's quite some time that he was off. And it was he was undergoing minor operations at RAF Holton that he actually met a nurse called Helen Swan, who would become his wife. In August 1940, the couple were married at Helen's home visit of a village of Worth in Sussex. October 1940, Hugh Malcolm was finally declared fit for operational duties. He'd been promoted to a flight lieutenant on the 4th of March 1941 and been given as the role of an air liaison officer on General Bernard Montgomery's staff. So he still wasn't flying, he was doing his staff officer. It would appear that he actually pestered to get back to operational flying, and January 1942, by which stage he was now a squadron leader, he started converting on to twin-engine bombers, mainly the Bristol Blenheim. This led to posting to command a flight of 18 Squadron, because 18 Squadron is still in existence, flying Chinooks. But they were based at RAF Wattisham in Suffolk. RAF Wattisham used to be an RAF airfield, is now Army Air Corps. Here a fellow flyer remembered Malcolm that he was, quote, very chuffed with life, having recently got married, was debonair, cheerful, and couldn't care less character, who soon had the liking of everybody in his flight. Nobody could avoid noticing that the skull under his left temple had been severely crushed in. Hugh Malcolm now flew a number of sorties from the UK, very, very dangerous time for Blenheims, flying in daylight. The German fighters were quite active over the North Sea, which is where he'd fly over. So he'd go and attack targets off the coast of Holland, off the coast of Denmark, and especially when they moved to West Raynham, they could actually get a bit further north. But soon after going to West Raynham, they were actually transferred to North Africa. The squadron was soon in action, flying from Blida, a place called to attack places like Bizerta. By now, he was commanding 18 Squadron, but his time in command was very, very, very limited, because yet again, the Blenheim Mark 5s that they were flying were up against the latest mark of Messerschmitt 109, so the end of 1942, and the Germans had just moved Focke-Wulf 190s in there. 4 ops took place, 2 at night and 1 against German tanks and lorries, and then on the 4th of December 1942, 18 Squadron was, and I quote, tasked to provide urgent support to the army by attacking Chughi Aerodrome. Due to the immediacy of the request, no fighter protection could be arranged. A staff officer, Group Captain Laurie Sinclair, actually wrote afterwards, when he tasked Wing Commander Hugh Malcolm with carrying out this task, this is what he said. This officer was detailed with his squadron to operate in the role of close support for the First Army, with instructions to receive his orders by means of the radio set. These, where they came through, were to attack an enemy satellite aerodrome. He immediately took off with his squadron and proceeded. That airfield had the latest mark of Me-109s. It contained a German squadron which had just moved from northwest France. One of the pilots I actually interviewed what happened, and they were bounced by the latest Messerschmitt 109G fighters, high altitude aircraft, so they didn't have a chance. They had a number of very experienced pilots flying with the Me-109 unit, so really they didn't have much of a chance. And one of the survivors actually wrote this afterwards. In the tightest possible formation, we weaved as a single unit through the valleys and hills. We could see the fighters' cannon shells bursting all along the hillsides level with our faces. Finally, we were forced out of formation, and with the starboard engine on fire, the fuselage on fire, and a large piece of wing missing, we went into a hillside about 150 miles an hour. Now that's one of the guys who survived. The combined attack from 13 Squadron, 18 Squadron, 114 Squadron, and 614 Squadron, which was led by Malcolm, 6 aircraft failed to return and 2 aircraft crashed on takeoff. Hugh Malcolm was one of the ones who didn't survive. He and his 2 crew were killed when his aircraft piled into the hillside. He was only 26 years old. Again, up until then, people didn't know anything about him, but after his death, what he did in North Africa was actually sort of met by Air Marshal Lord Tedder, who was there at the time, and as a result, he and his wife formed a series of clubs in North Africa, which was actually transferred then to all over the world. We even had a Malcolm Club in Japan, many in Germany, and that was in Hugh Malcolm's name, and that's where he led. But before then, he'd actually done nothing. But as an officer, as a pilot, as a leader, he was fantastic. One of the survivors actually said of him, "We would gladly followed him anywhere. He was superb. He radiated a joy of living and fighting, which was irresistible." Ladies and gentlemen, a bit of a gamble, a bit of a gallop, but it's half an hour. I don't want to take too much of your day and too much of your time. Hopefully that gives you, you would have heard about the guys from Coastal Command who got Victoria Crosses, the guys from Bomber Command who got Victoria Crosses. But there were just those two guys, one from Fighter Command, one from North Africa. Those were the only two RAF aircrew who received the Victoria Crosses. Before their action, not very much was known about it, but their name now lives on for what they did on the 16th of August and the 4th of December. And as a result, their name lives on, and we now hopefully will realise why they deserve the Victoria Cross. Ladies and gentlemen, over to you.